Today on the Resilient Responder podcast, we are so fortunate to be joined by Boston Marathon bombing survivor and incredible para-athlete Adrianne Haslet. I randomly reached out to Adrianne on Instagram. I was looking for somebody who had survived this incident to be able to speak to us about it, and she was so kind to get back to me. She was so willing to trust me with her story, and the conversation that we had was really moving. I think it's important to document survival stories like Adrianne's to hear about what somebody does, not only in the moments after something like the Boston Marathon bombing happens to them, but also sort of document their overcoming process, their moving forward process. What does that look like? How does somebody fold an experience like that was not only personal, but also global into their life? Adrianne talked about her journey to self-discovery and sort of self-redefinition, which I really loved. Her journey on a prosthetic, what happened when she was a part of the trial and sat in the room and testified, next to the man who had tried to kill her. I'm really honored to be able to capture her conversation here, and I hope you enjoy it.
Adrianne, welcome to the Resilient Responder.
Thank you so much, Ali. I'm honored to be here and been looking forward to this conversation.
I'm so excited to talk with you. Now, I heard you say in an interview about the terrorists that caused the bombing that you survived. I heard you say that they had you for 3.5 seconds, but the rest of your life has been up to you to define. And I love your application of self-definition, of sort of this redefinition, because not only did you survive something that impacted you personally, you experienced this sort of within the context of this larger event. And we know that trauma can change the way that we see ourselves, our place in the world. And I wonder if we could start there with just sort of how you define yourself these days in the context of this experience.
Yeah, I like the question. Yeah, I remember saying that in a Nora O'Donnell interview, just saying, I think I'm going to misquote her and I shouldn't because she's brilliant, but it was, basically she said, how do you move on? How do you move through something like this? And I say, and I think she said something about without being bitter. And I said, he only had me for Monster. I don't ever say his name, only had me for 3.5 seconds. That's how long it took for the blast to go through the air and for it to hit me. And then after that, it was up to me and my first responders and my family and friends and everyone else. I certainly didn't do it alone. My therapist, my leg guy, a bunch of people, my dog, Fred Astaire. It is really important for me and my mental health, to answer your question, to recognize that monster doesn't have a grip on me now. Because it is very easy, and I'm sure you see this in your important work that you do, Ali, that it is so easy to think, well, this person ruined my life and I'll never be the same, and I can never have a good solid relationship, or I can never have a good relationship with my body, or I can never go swimming, or I could never hike a mountain, or I could never, right? And of course, my life will never be the same. And yes, relationships are different. And yes, I have a different relationship with my body, but that doesn't own me and it doesn't define me. And all of that, again, is up to me. It's not up to that monster. He tried to kill me. He was unsuccessful, thankfully. And I am grateful that A, I survived, and B, that I have, the ability and the mindset and the support with my therapist and others that I can really recognize that the rest of this is up to me. And I can own that, and I can make that miserable, or I can make it a good thing. And I want to stress here before we go on that it is so easy for me to say that and put it into practice is very, very different. So before anyone shuts off the podcast and think, well, she just made a decision and everything's fine, that is not the case. And I'm sure that we will, and I hope we do get into that. But as far as defining that who's going to dictate the rest of my life, that's me. And I own that, for better, for worse.
Amen. I wonder about what role that one day has in your life now. I think about my friend Christina, who was shot in Norris Hall at Virginia Tech, and she talked to me about those experiences. And she said, I thought about that classroom, the classroom she almost died in, every day for 10 years. And then since then, she sort of thinks about the classroom less and thinks sort of about the larger impact of that event now. And I wonder, how do you relate to that one day now? What role does it have in your life?
Well, first of all, my heart goes out to Christina, because that sounds like a really hard thing to go through, and my heart goes out to her. But yes, I can relate to that in the sense that replaying that day over and over again is something that I did a lot of. Everyone, as you know, experiences trauma very differently. There were a lot of us on that sidewalk that day, and we all walked away from that experience with very similar injuries, some very different, but some very similar. And even though we had similar injuries, we were standing right next to each other. We have very different takeaways based on how you were raised, based on how you process trauma, based on how you overcame things as a child. It's all very different. So I say all of that because I process things. I don't do the why me? Why didn't the coffee pot take an extra 2 minutes that day to leave me home so that I wouldn't be in that exact space on that exact sidewalk that moment? I don't do the, I wish I hadn't moved to Boston, or I wish I hadn't gone there that day. I don't do that. It's just not the way my brain works. It's not something that I can really control. And I feel grateful for that. But I did do the, why did someone do this? Why would someone want to hurt other people in that way? Why would someone want to commit mass murder or attempt to commit mass murder? And why would someone do that? And I did that over and over again. And finally, one day, my therapist looked at me dead in the eye, and he leans forward really dramatically, and he said, Adrian, this is my first therapist. He said, Adrian, if you're racking your brain trying to figure out why terrible people do terrible things and you don't understand, it just means you're not one of those terrible people. And I said, okay, explain more. I like that, but explain more. And he said, if you understood and you're like, I totally get why he did that, then I would have to lock you up. And I thought, of course, that's a good enough answer for me. So I didn't do the why me, but so in that, I say that, Ali, because I really, that also shows my relationship to that day. Yes, that was a big deal. Yes, it was a big day. Yes, it was, that goes without saying, it was a big deal and a big day. But I also didn't know anything that much about the Boston Marathon. So I wasn't going into this day thinking, I'm going to watch this and this is how the day is going to end. I was just sort of wandering around Boston and happened upon it and was there for just a few minutes before the blast went off. So in that sense, my relationship to the day is any average day. And that happened very quickly and the whole day changed. So I don't relive the morning very often, the times before the blast went off, but I do relive the sidewalk, the moment I opened my eyes, and I was awake the entire time. And the moment I opened my eyes and scooting across the pavement and what I saw from other people that were next to me. I think about that a lot. But I think about it less and less now. But I don't think about it in a traumatic way, because I was participating in the trial. And because I was participating in the trial, I watched a video of myself on the sidewalk walking. I learned that I was walking shoulder to shoulder with the monster. I didn't know it. Of course, I didn't know it. I had no reason to know it. And because I was doing that, I watched it frame by frame, and then eventually live, and then eventually watched it in the courtroom with the monster right there. And because I was walked through that process with the FBI and prosecution, and in a very controlled, very loving as it could be, very comforting space, as comforting as that could be. And people will think that's crazy for me to say, but if you're going to make a really hard situation comforting, they did a really good job of it. They're now some of my nearest and dearest friends, those FBI and prosecution. We would go out for beers after, or we would go, and just talk after. And they always made sure that I had, I didn't go for beers with the FBI, but I did for prosecution. You can't do that with the FBI in an open case. Someone's going to call me on that. And just so you know, it was that. But we did after. And it was, they also would make sure that I had therapy sessions scheduled before or after. So it was a real village of people. And I think because I participated in the trial, and because I saw myself on camera doing that and really walked myself through it, both physically, mentally for the case, digesting every single step and move and moment, and then processed it through my therapist, I was left with no answer, like no questions and all answers. And so I think when there's something that psychologists say when you're processing trauma and have nightmares, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it can be your brain trying to have answers to questions that you don't know. And so because I was awake the whole time and because all of my questions were answered about every single thing that I was wondering by the people that knew the facts, I didn't have nightmares and I didn't have bad dreams, and I still don't about it at all. And I was able to process it. I started to dream that I was an amputee just 2 months after losing my leg, which is pretty unheard of, because my subconscious just knew that that's what was happening. And I don't say any of this to like win some award for processing trauma well. I didn't process it well. I had horrible days and months and a couple of years there. But I think that really impacted how I feel about that day. Like, I feel like I've almost exhausted it. Like I have no questions. I have only answers, and I know it so clearly. And it was horrible and awful. And I remember calling my parents to say goodbye and how hard that was. And I remember all of it, but I don't have any questions or anything that's undone or unsaid.
Wow. What a unique way to process a day like that. To be walked through it so completely.
For years. I mean,
wow.
I was in that courthouse, in the side courthouse for like a year and a half, processing that and getting, the reason that it took so long is because you tell the story of what happened. That's your truth. You're not being told what to say, but I was telling you, like, I walked out on the sidewalk and then I paused to watch runners, and then heard the first, you go through your whole thing while you're watching. And as I was watching, I would just start sobbing. So really most of the time was just me watching 2 frames, sobbing, and then leaving, and then watching another 2 frames, and then sobbing, and then leaving, and then watching live. And then, so that's why it took so long to be able to get through it. And you need to be able to say it all so that the jury can hear it without you like gargling up tears. You need to be able to say it clearly. So that's why it took so long. But yes, it was a very unique way to process a trauma. And look, I know it's not for everyone, but it certainly helped me. And I think that greatly shaped that day. I feel it was so freaking hard, but it was so needed for me. I like to have the answers. I like it to be crystal clear. So that was helpful.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about the first responders, both on that day at the marathon and the hospital, given that our audience is a large amount, of those people. And, as first responders, we almost never get follow up on the people that we help. Sometimes in larger things like this, there's more of an effort made to be like, did that person live? What's going on? How are they? So I wonder if you could speak to just who you remember both there at the marathon and then after in the hospital.
Yeah. So gosh, I remember, like I said, I was awake through the whole thing. So I remember, landing on the sidewalk and looking down and seeing that my foot was gone. And there were parts that were still there, which is why I have some weird photos of it that people have seen online, but most of it 99% of it was gone. And I remember thinking like, this is it. And I moved my body over and I flipped over onto my belly and started to like barrel crawl. Is that what they call it? When you're crawling on your forearms. Sorry, what was that? Army crawl. That's what it is. Oh, my dad would never let me say that because he's Navy. That's why I don't remember it. I started to Navy crawl across the ground.
Sure.
I'm not allowed to say that word, Army. And the reason that I had my first responder was because a first responder who's chosen to remain, he testified. And one of the things he testified was very important that I'll get to, but he testified because one of the things that they wanted to note was how many people would have passed if they didn't have the help that they did, have the first responders that they did. And so we'll just call him Dr. B. He wants to be anonymous and I respect that. So Dr. B stepped over me. And I remember a few people stepping over me, and had thought that I was no longer there. And just because of the amount of blood loss and the shape that I was in. And so he had stepped over me and started looking around to see who he could help. And then I flipped over and started, and he was like, oh my gosh, there's no way she's going to live. And he grabbed me and dragged me the rest of the way over into the staircase. I remember him. And then he ripped off his belt and tied it around a tourniquet, and then ripped off the belt of a man standing next to him, like MacGyver style, if I'm aging myself, MacGyver style, and did the other tourniquet and got another guy to hold that belt in the tightest tourniquet possible. And then a busboy from that restaurant that we were in called the Forum Restaurant, it's no longer around. The busboy came over, and he is from a third world country, and he had moved to Boston to get away from roadside bombs, and he knew exactly what to do. So he came up to me, and he's holding my neck, because they weren't sure where most of my other injuries were. I had a giant gash in my right thigh, and I had my eyebrow had been on fire. So they weren't quite sure like where my other injuries were. So he was holding my neck also so that I couldn't see what was going on at my feet. And he just talked to me through it. And then in walked 5 very hot firemen and put me on a gurney, and I was out of there, and then put in an ambulance. And then I remember going to the hospital and having, the first 1 or 2 to 20 nurses and doctors, and it was triage at that point. And then I wheeled in and then I said goodbye. I called my parents to say goodbye. I had many doctors and nurses saying, you're not going to make it. The blood loss was too great. A lot of them couldn't even, I don't know how detailed I should get.
As much as you want.
They couldn't get to my gurney because there was so much, like there was slipping on blood, but it was so awful. And so they said, you need to call home and say goodbye. Or if they're nearby, they can get here. And I was like, I have family all the way across the country. Like, there's no way. There's just no way they can get here. And I remember feeling so guilty that I had, moved across the country for this dream of becoming a professional ballroom dancer, which I did. And I was successful at it, but how selfish and vain I was for doing that. It just felt so real at that moment, to try and be, quote unquote, perfect, whatever the hell that means. And so I called them and said goodbye. And it was the hardest call I'd ever made. I remember thinking that I didn't know who to call. I didn't know if I should call my dad or my mom, even though they're together. I didn't know if they were like physically together, and I couldn't do the brain math at that moment. Obviously I had no bandwidth to do that, of like what the time change would be to try and figure out their schedule. And they're retired now from their independent books and record store. So I thought, I'm just going to call dad. Like he can tell mom, and I'm a daddy's girl through and through anyway. So it wouldn't surprise anyone that I would call him, because they gave me one phone call, and I called and he answered, and he said mom was driving. And I said, you need to pull over. And he said, we're on the freeway. And I said, dad, pull over. And it must've sounded a little too calm because I didn't want to cause an accident. That he said, young lady, you took your driving test in the state of Washington, and you know that you can't pull over on the state of Washington on the freeway. And I was like, dad, pull over. And my father fought in Vietnam and went to the Naval Academy. And so he knows my voice, and he knows the voice of someone who's been really injured. And I said goodbye. And then I wheeled into the surgical room, into the OR operating room. And I saw a man with a, surgical mask on, and he said, my name is Dr. Kalish. He said, Adrian, my name is Dr. Kalish. I was at the finish line waiting for my wife. She's okay. I hopped in a pedicab, and I came to the hospital, washed up, and I'm going to save your life. And I said, and we still joke about this to this day, because now we can joke about it, and we're still very, very tight. One of his daughters became a ballroom dancer, which is very sweet. And his wife is just as extraordinary as he is. And after he said, I'm going to operate on you and save your life, I said, my foot is over on Boylston Street. and I haven't won first in the world, and my parents are on their way. And you better have had sleep last night. And he said, count back from 10. And I counted back from 10. And then I woke up 20 some odd hours later. And my parents were there, which was really nice. And Dr. Kalish was there, my Superman surgeon. That's like the first round of first responders, but I have a million since then. I mean, it would take up 4 days of podcasts. I'm not that I don't want to name them all, but it would take a long time. I really had a lot between nurses and I had more than one surgery, and nurses and PT and OT and people that I have now still in my life that I'm just meeting now that are healing me in ways that they don't even know. I still consider them first responders too. So I don't think it just ends and, oh, this one's going to live,
Right. Wow.
I think first responders are people that come in when you need it. I think first responders are people that come in when you're having a bad day and they, help you have a less than bad day. I'm a speaker.
Yeah.
Hire me. That made sense.
Yeah. I trip over my words all the time. I've written books. It's fine. Right. It happens to all of us. Tell us about your training for and running of the marathon as a para-athlete, and also including the setback that you had in 2019 while training.
Oh gosh, yeah. So I was not a runner when this happened. I was a professional ballroom dancer, and I would never get caught sweating in public ever. I would never get caught in flat shoes. As a ballroom dancer, you're contractually obligated to wear high heels, even in the grocery store, where those people that are in the grocery store wearing high heels. Don't judge us. I don't do it anymore, but I also don't judge others that do, because we're training our feet. So I would never get caught running. But that all changed, my need for vanity after losing my leg. I'm still vain now, but in a different way than I was as a ballroom dancer. It doesn't take me 3.5 hours to get ready in bronze and have perfect nails and everything that I did then. So I was introduced to the running community after everything happened at the Boston Marathon. And I had said early on in an interview with Anderson Cooper that I wanted to eventually run Boston. And I wanted to run as a thank you. And, for all the strength and love and support that the Boston Strong community showed to all of us survivors. And so, yeah, I halfway trained, not even halfway. I had no idea what I was doing. I knew runners as acquaintances, but I didn't know anyone. I didn't put as much thought as I should have into it. And I lined up for the 2016 Boston Marathon, and I trudged my way through it. I took a nap. I sat on the sidewalk. I cried. I celebrated. I took shots in BU. I did all sorts of things. And it was awesome. And I wouldn't have changed it for the world. And I ran with my boyfriend at the time, and my best friend and my boyfriend's brother. And it was awesome. And we finished dead last in the Boston Marathon in 10 hours and 44 minutes. And about 2 minutes after I crossed, then President Barack Obama tweeted me and said, "Adrian, congratulations on finishing the race. We never let terror and bombs stop us. We carry on and we finish." And I just popped the champagne. It was like, I love running.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
I was so naive. I didn't notice the 30,000 runners that had passed in front of me. And it was just very fun. And I loved it. And I realized after that if you know what it's like to come in dead last, I wonder what it would be like to come in first. And so, yeah, I was able to, train a little bit harder, and I looked around and I didn't see that there was a division for people with limb loss. There are certainly the push chairs and push rim wheelchairs, but that wasn't how I ran. I ran in a running blade, and I know a ton of other people that do too. And so I went to the Boston Athletic Association and I said, "Hey, I'd love to be able to find a competitive race. Do you think you could make a division?" And they said, "Adrian, 10 hours and 44 minutes isn't exactly competitive." And I said, "Okay, fair." And they're dear friends of mine. And they said it as sweetly as they could. And I was like, "Okay, fair." And I trained hard, and I went to a bunch of amputee conventions as a speaker, as my full-time job as a speaker. And I was asking around, to my leg guy and to other people, are there competitive marathoners out there that want to be competitive, that want to compete in something like this. And I was able to find a whole community, and I brought more of these conversations to the BAA. And in 2018, I felt really well trained, and there were some other people too, and that were way faster than I was and doing really well. And we all lined up. We didn't have a competitive division, but we did have an early start, so they could keep an eye on us and really, look at us from a different lens of a potential competitive group. And so, the gun went off, and it was like a nor'easter monsoon. They had closed Boston Logan Airport that day. They never closed Boston Logan. And my gosh, I got hypothermia at like mile 10. I didn't know my own name, and a bunch of people dropped out. So it was not our best showing. It's nobody's fault. It was just the weather and that's the thing with having a race in April. You just don't know, how that's going to go. Yeah. And of course it was devastating to not finish when you've trained so hard, but then it was 2019, and I trained just as hard and maybe a little harder, a little smarter. You try and get better each time. And it was 100 days out from the Boston Marathon. How poetic. And about 100 days out, I like to get together with some friends and go for a pasta dinner and kind of recap training so far and what the next 100 days are going to hold. And I was walking to dinner, and I was just a few blocks away from the finish line again. And it was nighttime, and a car coming at me at 40 plus miles an hour with no headlights on, rammed into my left side, into my prosthetic leg, and the carbon fiber of the bumper of the car hit the carbon fiber of the bumper of my prosthetic leg and bounced me out into the air. And I flew like 5 car lengths and landed on my left shoulder. And, it was just horrific. And I felt it crash and like crumble underneath me. And I kept getting closer and closer to the sidewalk as my shoulder kept crumbling and crumbling. And luckily my head hit last, and I was awake again through the whole thing. And I remember screaming for help. And the fire department showed up. It's the same fire department that's right there at the corner of Boylston, same hot firemen. None of them were single still. And I screamed out, and they were like, "Adrian again?" And I was like, "Yes." And I called.
You're like, "Me again."
And I had them call Dr. Kalish, my Superman surgeon, and I screamed at him, and I was like, "Get to the hospital right now." And the doors opened to the ambulance, and he was right there. Thankfully, he was already on shift, and he saw to my recovery. And to put it in perspective, when I was in 2013, I was in the hospital for like 2.5 weeks. It was too short, but I was in the hospital for about 2.5 weeks. And for this one, including PT, I was in treatment for 4.5 months. It was almost half a year. It was just horrific. I couldn't put on my leg because I couldn't move my shoulder. It was awful. I couldn't have my service dog Fred Astaire with me because he hugs me when I'm hurting, and you can't stop him from that. So he had to go live with someone else. And it was horrific. And I was really put into a state of depression, and I didn't bounce back very fast. And my parents didn't come out, which is a whole issue. And I didn't have, I had a lot of public support, but I didn't have the personal support that I needed. And it was very hard. And I fell into a really big depression. And I don't think a lot of people knew that at the time, besides my therapist and like my really close friends. But then the Boston Athletic Association reached out, and they said, "We'd love to have coffee with you and talk about the 2020 marathon." And I said, I can't even have the conversation. Like, I'm never running again. I can't do this. I'm going to buy a box of Cheetos and an easy chair and just call it a life. Like I never thought of harming myself, but I was definitely giving up on the like participating in everyday life stuff as far as that level. Not in everyday life stuff, but in the public and the, shooting for the stars kind of things. I'd climbed some ice volcanoes by then. Like I'd done it, I'd done it. I'd gone on a safari. I'd spoken all over the globe. I was like, I call it a day, Adrian, you lived a good life, and time to retire on your easy chair. And so they said, "Can we please just go to coffee and we'll talk. We're good friends. Let's just talk." So I go out and I get to coffee, And I slumped down in my chair, and they could see that I was just, a miserable wreck. And they said, Adrian, the reason we keep talking about you and this is prior to the 2019 marathon. This is still like a few months out from 2019. And they said, the reason we keep talking about you at the 2020 marathon is because we wanted to let you know in person that you got your division. We're going to have it at the 2020 Boston Marathon. And I just started sobbing. And that was all it took. That's not all it took to get me out of my depression, but it was definitely helped to set a goal. And they said, we need you to win it for Boston. And I was like, done. So then I was in therapy, and I was doing my PT and OT exercises and took everything a little bit more seriously and really trained really hard. And then 2020 hit. We all know what happened, but it's okay, because I needed some more time to heal, and mentally especially, but physically too. And then 2021, I rolled my ankle, but I got to cheer on the first division. And then 2022, I ran, and it was pretty awesome. It was really, really awesome.
I bet it was. I love seeing pictures of you finish that race.
It was
even now, knowing all that went into it.
Pick up your bib and have your name on it, just like a regular professional runner. I remember, the best part about all of it. I mean, certainly finishing is wonderful, and competing in the Boston Marathon next to your sister in sport, Shalane Flanagan, and training it like an Olympian the whole time out in Oregon with Nike and her whole team. The Bowerman Track Club, they all accepted me, even though they had no reason to. And they were so sweet about it. And the best part about the whole thing was when we announced that the division was going to happen, which was a couple months after they took me to coffee that day. And we announced it at one of the press conferences for the 2019 race. And that night, how you're on social media and you see videos of people telling people like, oh, I got into Harvard, or, oh, you're getting a puppy, or, oh, you're taking you to Disneyland, and you cry watching it, even though you don't know them, because you're just so happy for them. You're happy for their joy. I was being sent video after video of people telling their friends with limb loss and limb difference that they could one day win the Boston Marathon. I still can't say it without crying. And it was the most amazing thing to just watch video after video. And these little kids that still send me their training videos, by the way, they're not old enough to run it yet, but like they're going to smoke all of our times because they're going to be doing it since they were little. And they now have someone. Yeah. So running that race with Shalane and towing the line with her and matching outfits. We had matching nails that with 2.1 written on them for the 2.1 million people living with limb loss and limb difference in the world. And we're running and we see, my PTs and OTs and my Superman surgeon and the FBI and prosecution and, so many people that have helped and supported. But the best part was people living with limb loss and limb difference that were sticking their arms and legs out and being like as if they're hailing a cab and being like, look, me too. Yeah. Like, it's incredible. And when you have a soon-to-be president, I guess, if you call him that, saying that he thinks people with limb loss and limb difference should be locked up and put away. Which was the law back in the day, if people want to look that up. It's a really amazing thing to be able to know that the Boston Athletic Association took that step and that risk really to rearrange their whole race, to have faith in us and to be able to do that. And people are out there smoking all the times that we, keep hitting every year. And it's just a real honor to be able to witness that.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to us about the ways that you sort of prioritize your mental health and your wellness. What does it mean to you to embody wellness or to be mentally well? Of course, this is something that's like it's a journey, not a destination, right? We're never going to be perfect at these things. But what does it look like for you to sort of prioritize those parts of yourself?
Yeah, it looks different at different times. I think for me, it's therapy for sure. I prioritize that no matter what. Even if I'm on a vacation, I'll just find a quiet spot with Wi-Fi. It's important to me. It's a date I make with myself, and bosses don't cancel. And so I do that. Time with my dog, time with my service dog is important to me. Time with my people is important to me. It's also important to me not to dismiss my feelings. I have known people in my immediate family, I won't name names, they know who they are, and in relationships or anyone who bottles their feelings and pushes them down. I can't surround myself with people like that. I can't do it myself. I'm physically unable to do that. Even if I tried, it's not good. And so I think prioritizing feeling my feelings and moving through them as opposed to pushing past them is really important to me. And that doesn't mean having this giant reaction to every feeling. It means, oh, I'm feeling really sad right now. I should, take a walk. Or, oh, I'm feeling this right now. I should not make a really big decision. Or, oh, I'm feeling this right now. I should not trust how I see myself when I'm feeling this way and I haven't had sleep, or maybe I'm hungry, or, it's just checking in. I think prioritizing my mental health is checking in with myself and making sure I'm filling my own cup, as absolutely cliche as that sounds, especially from a speaker. I know and I see when loved ones or past loved ones can't do that or won't do that. And it is tragic. It's really tragic to see. And it hurts me because I want them to have peace, and that's hard. It's very hard to witness someone that does that and think that they're being healthy. So yeah, I think for me, it's prioritizing what I'm feeling, being really present, even in a conversation that's going to go public like ours, like really checking in with myself and my answers and what I feel like sharing, what I can share, and just being really present and honest. And then I can walk away thinking, yeah, that was me. That was me, honestly. Because I've found also that, some people feel, and I know this is true with other people that are in the public eye, that you have to be quote unquote on or have put up this front in order to do what you do. And of course, some days I give speeches when I really want to crawl under a rock, of course, but that's no different than someone else that shows up at the office when they want to crawl under a rock, And so, yes, there's that. Of course, you have to, put on something, but I feel really grateful that I've built a brand on my vulnerability and my, and who I am authentically. And I am grateful that I can do that, because then I can show up sometimes and say, I'm having a hard day. I'm not today, but I'm having a hard day. And I've said that in some speeches too, and I think that people can recognize that after what I've been through. Right. And I'm not the only one that gets a pass on that, right? Like, you don't have to go through what I'm going through to have a really tough day and to say, I'm not going to be my best self, but I'm going to be my best self today. And that's 100% okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's how I prioritize my mental health, is just to be really authentically honest with where I am and who I am and where I'm going.
I love that. And I have found that too. I think that's certainly something I've learned over the last decade of being a public figure and standing on stages, is that concept of, you go to the bathroom after a talk and there's 4 people in the bathroom that want to talk to you. And you're like, I'm just trying to have a quiet moment because I just, exerted so much energy telling that story. And I think I've definitely learned how to set those boundaries. What do I need to be able to show up in the best way that I can for these people? And, and speaking about ways to connect with ourselves, to be mindful, to sort of ground ourselves in what makes us feel the most authentic, I have in the last maybe year or so, we'll say half seriously, but pretty seriously, picked up running. And I found it to be something that I love. I miss it if I can't do it. I've, run a ton of 5Ks. I'm doing my first 10K in 2 days. She says to a multiple marathon runner.
Exciting. That's so exciting. Congratulations.
I love it. Thank you. It's just something that I really enjoy. And so I wonder if you could talk to us about how you view running now and the role that it plays in your life, and what does running or ballroom dancing or being physically active and connected to yourself that way mean to you?
Yeah. Well, Ali, first of all, I want to say, I want to answer this question, obviously, but I do want to circle back to what you said about getting off stage and then going. I can relate to this deeply about going to the restroom and then being bombarded, or stepping off stage and being, even if it's one person that suddenly like starts asking you all these questions. When someone says, your organizer, someone that's your point person says, I don't ask for like green M&Ms. I ask for like a bottle of water. Like, I'm not high maintenance at all. But I will say, as soon as I'm off the stage, I need alone time for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Like, nobody talk to me. Or if you have a single use bathroom, then I'll go use that. But like, that's what I need. And then they will literally like corner you somewhere. I worked that out with my therapist. I thought that was like asking too much because we're women and we're not supposed to do that. I'm saying that sarcastically, ladies and men, to the Chads and Brads. But to quote Taylor, and but I found that. So that's my little tip for you. Like do what you need. That's part of the mental health thing, right? Like do what you need.
No, 100%.
Just say,
I go back to my hotel room.
Right. Well,
I go back to my hotel room and it's just like for 30 minutes.
But then you still have the elevator ride and everything else. So I'm just saying
true.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure that you knew that totally ask.
Yes.
It's not too much.
Absolutely.
But
no.
How does being active or running or ballroom dancing really help? How does it show up for me? It certainly does help. I had a career where I would walk into a studio with, 10 or 15 pro dancers that could dance anything to any song. And I could, put on my favorite song or put on anything that I wanted to dance to. And if I was having a hard day, within seconds, and that's not exaggerating, within seconds, I would feel better. Because I was dancing, and we all know that music and everything else helps your mental health so much. And also moving and being with somebody else that's happy and dancing and being in someone else's arms with top hat and tails is you really can't go wrong. You certainly had bad days dancing, but it's pretty incredible. And so that was a big deal. And when that was taken from me, my world ended, and I didn't realize how much I was relying on that as a mental health, as something that was great for my mental health. I knew it was, but I didn't realize how badly I needed it. And I couldn't listen to music. I remember being in the hospital and they have that very quiet background music that's happening. And I said, I'm gonna crawl out of my skin. There's no such thing as background music for a dancer. We're always choreographing. Even if I'm having a conversation with someone at dinner, sorry friends, I'm choreographing something in my head into the music that's playing. That's just how my brain works. And I got it all down, and I'm gonna, it's just how our brain works. And so they had to disconnect the wires from the speaker above my hospital bed. And then they had a beautiful harpist that came around and was playing music. And I was like, get out of the hallway. I can't. I was just sobbing. If that person's listening, your music was beautiful. I just couldn't do it at the time. It was not you. It was me. So yeah, that was really tough for me. But when I took up running, even before that, when I started to learn how to walk again, and it was so painful. You could only walk, when you first get your leg, you can walk for 10 minutes, then you take it off and rest for 2 hours, then you put it on for another 5 minutes, then you take it off and rest. It's not a snap on a Lego and go. But when I really started walking again, and I could do an hour with minimal pain, I remember just feeling so good that I could move, that I could travel from one place to the other, that I could go into because I was in a wheelchair for so long, 4 months. And I remember thinking how grateful I was to walk into a non-accessible stall in the bathroom, so just walking was a big deal to me. And then I started dancing a little bit, and then I took up running. But yeah, I think moving is it's a big deal. It just feels, it's in my bones. I think I've been dancing since I was out of the womb. That's just who I am. So moving my body, whether it's a walk with Fred or a long coffee walk with my dear friend Angela, who we do, we try and do as often as possible here in Boston. And it's just a beautiful thing. I just love it so much. Yeah, it means moving my body is everything.
I'm so grateful that you can do it.
And I notice my mental health. I notice in my mental health when I don't do it. So it's an easy reminder for me. I can feel it. It's like not getting enough sleep. You can just feel it.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely relate to that. 2 more.
Yes.
So the concept of a shared experience is one that I think is so important, and being willing to share our own experiences can be so critical for not only our own, putting words to our experiences matters for ourselves, but then what it can mean for other people. And I have seen that certainly in my own experience as a trauma survivor, standing publicly in that story, sort of the permission in a way that it gives other people to then stand in their stories. And I wonder if you could speak to that experience for you. I know that you had an experience where you met with 9/11 survivors. And if you could just share a little bit about that experience of sharing an experience and what that means for you.
Yeah. So it was so obvious to me at the beginning that I needed a therapist, because I couldn't talk about this with my people. I tried, and they were wonderful, and they certainly gave their best answers to my feelings, and they showed up to me in the best ways that they could, and they weren't incorrect in any of that. But I knew that I needed a therapist, and so I talked to my Superman surgeon, because I had major stranger danger. I was just not talking to anyone else besides my family and him. And I said, I need a therapist, and his wife is a psychologist. And so they found me Dr. Cooper, who's now retired. He retired. I paid him way too much. I say that with love and regret. And he specializes in mass trauma. So this is to answer your question. He specializes in mass trauma. So he wrote some of the books at Harvard about mass trauma and 9/11 and what it means to survive with others and suffer with others and lose family members with others, and have the court of public opinion about your loss or your trauma, and how that affects your brain and how that affects your processing. And so he was the best I could get. And I was so grateful, because I could go to him and say, we had a meeting about XYZ with the survivor community, and it got nasty because some people were saying that so-and-so wasn't allowed in so-and-so's room, and so-and-so, I'm not going to, it was just, some of them got nasty. And I just witnessed that. I wasn't getting into it, and it was bad. And he said, Adrian, you should not go to those. Like I've seen this. It is detrimental that in your mental health. And I'll talk about this in my book, but it is very unhealthy. And so that was really helpful for me to talk to him about what it meant to process things with other people. I went to lunch once with two other survivors who I will definitely keep nameless. And we had talked when we were in the hospital, like, let's all go to lunch when this is all over, when we're off our meds and we can have cocktails and just really walk into a restaurant, and it'll be a while, but we're going to do this. So we did it. And we're just halfway through lunch, and one of them looks at me and they say, I think I saw your foot on the ground. You were in brown boots, right? I think I saw it halfway across from me. And I was like, you've got to be flipping kidding me. I've never moved faster in that moment walking than I did walking to the restroom right after that to sob. I just could not believe it. And it was just very normal question for that person. But after that, I decided that sort of the group thing was not for me. And so when this is all within the first year, so this is getting to the answer your question, which is when I met with those 9/11 families, they had volunteered to come out and meet with us Boston bombing survivors and family members of those lost, to talk through what it meant to get through a very public anniversary, because the anniversary was coming and there were lots of press already. And it was so kind of those families to come out. And I thought, I don't want to do this. I don't want to, anyone can come up to you. Again, it's similar to when you step off a stage, people can come up to you and just say things and trigger you in a way. And now I have, coping mechanisms and ways that I can deal with any of those kind of conversations. But at that time, it was still within a year. I was very much a shell of myself. I was not walking very well. It was, I had survived this New England winter with tons of snow, and it was just very hard. But I drugged myself there, and I was so glad I did, because the 9/11 families were talking about how hard it is to have a public anniversary. And afterward, a gentleman came up to me and said, Adrian, I'd like to talk to you. And I was like, oh no, I was just I had stranger danger. I mean, there's no other way to say it. There's nothing wrong with this person whatsoever. But I had stranger danger. And he said, the anniversary is going to come, and I just need you to know that if you wake up in a really good mood that day, don't blame yourself and don't think it's a bad thing. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, anniversaries are just for people who forget. And of course they mean something, and your body will remember, because our bodies always keep the score. But anniversaries are for people to say, oh, wow, it's been XYZ years since 9/11, or, oh, it's been XYZ years since the Boston bombing. Wow, I remember where I was then. And then they pour their coffee and carry on with their day. That's not to say that they don't care at all. That's not to say that they dismiss it. That's just their experience with that particular moment in history. And he said, but for us, remember that on a Tuesday, when you smell someone's cologne that you lost, or you have a pain in your foot, or you realize that something, you have a flashback that maybe you didn't remember before, and you don't call a friend back, remember that anniversaries are happening all year long for people that have had trauma. And so everyone's going to come up to you on that day and put their hand on your shoulder and hug you and say, oh, this must be so hard. But remember that for you, it's every day. And you need to tell your friends that and your close people that, so that they understand you as best they can and they can be there for you as best they can. And I just always remember that. And I was always so grateful for that yes, anniversaries are important, but they're also, as far as the media goes, they're there for people that might have forgotten.
That's a really good point.
And so if your friend has been through trauma, or your loved one has been through trauma, and they're not calling you back on a certain day, then maybe let them have that. You don't know what's going on. It's a really kinder way to say everybody's fighting a hard battle.
Very true. Very true. Just to wrap up, what have you learned about yourself in these last 11 years?
Oh, just to wrap up, let me take another 6 hours. No, I'm just kidding. My gosh, I have learned, no, I was kidding. I have learned that vulnerability is strength. I have learned that our bodies I've learned that my body can go through hell and back and somehow keep moving. And I have no clue how it does it. I have no clue. I am just, there's no other word besides flabbergasted at what our bodies can handle and how it can still recover. I don't get it. How I can wake up, shower, get ready, and go do something, and I'd still trucking. I just don't. It's shocking to me. Absolutely shocking. And I've learned a lot about gratitude. I was always striving, and there was, that got me into a lot of places in ballroom dancing. I was striving and trying to be the best and trying to be the best. And that served me well when it needed to. It certainly kept me unsatisfied also. And always yearning and not really celebrating where I was, and certainly not being present, like we talked about before, as far as mental health goes. But I've learned a lot about gratitude. I think, it's easy for someone to be watching this podcast or listening to this podcast and hearing a smile on my face and think, well, she's all fine and dandy. If she's happy, why aren't I happy? And I don't want people to think that, because I'm not all the time. But my gosh, am I so grateful to be here. That overwhelm of just being grateful that I can walk. There isn't a second of my life where I haven't gone up and down stairs that I'm I'm on stairs, woo woo, like a kindergartner. And I'm not ashamed of it. In my head every time. I could be on a really hot date with somebody and he's talking about something really important. And I'm I'm doing stairs. And he has no idea what's happening, but
you've earned that.
I love it. And it sounds gloating, but if you've been through what I've been through and not been able to do that, that's, and walking across marble floors. Why does everybody have marble floors? I hate marble floors. They're so slick. I hate them so much. They're not classy. They're not fun. And so I think just gratitude is just grateful to be here, grateful to experience new things, grateful to be a mom to my dog, Fred Astaire, grateful to have my family and my parents and my brothers close, not in geographically, but in phone calls all the time, and my friends. And I just am so grateful for that. I'm grateful for my Superman surgeon and my dear friends in prosecution and FBI and my OTs and PTs and everyone that's helped put this body back together a million times over. I think the overwhelm of gratitude is just, it's served me really well. It's not really a practice. It's just a constant feeling of it. Which feels really, really flippin' nice. I think that's what I've learned about myself. I think I've learned that I have more patience than I thought I did. When I was always striving and always trying to get something else, I was very impatient and just wanted to get to the next thing. And now I'm just enjoying it and being in the moment as much as I can. And I was born to be a dog mom. I just I've learned that about myself too.
God bless Fred Astaire. Well, that's a perfect place to end. On that note of gratitude, Adrian, thank you for your time, your energy. We're also so grateful you're here.
Thank you.
I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much, Ali. I am such a fan of your work and your TEDx talk, and I just think it's really important work, and thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful conversation.
So you can follow the Resilient Responder podcast or me, Ali W. Rothrock, on Instagram. You can read my book, After Trauma, anywhere you get your books. You can order it online, in person at a bookstore. I read the audiobook on Audible, which is available. It's also on Spotify. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.